And now I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on how business analysts provide value in today's work environment. I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter today. He is a senior business analyst instructor for the R.G. Freeman Group, Mr. Vincent Bordeaux. Vince is a certified business analyst, and he started his career working as an aerospace engineer and has held many positions in the software development industry. Without further ado, Vince, you now have the floor. Sorry, Vince, we can't seem to hear you. Maybe, I think you might be on mute.
Mayanne, thank you for keeping me online, and thank you all very much for participating in today's webinar. You know, Mayanne, I'm glad to see that there's many people that are interested in business analysis. This is one of the roles that have gained increased popularity over the last 10 years. So today we're going to cover what is the role of the business analyst, how do they bring value to an organization. One of the things that a business analyst focuses on are requirements. So we'll talk about the 4 requirements types and how they should be defined by a business analyst. And then I have interviewed several of my colleagues to be able to identify some of the tips and the tricks and the techniques that a business analyst uses. And these are professional business analysts. So hopefully, if you are interested in this role, or maybe you are playing this role yourself, you will see some of the most important things that we can do. So we'll get right into it, and the first one is what is or who is a business analyst, and this is a role that is instrumental in an organization because oftentimes requirements in particular are not very well defined, which actually causes many downstream problems within an IT or a process improvement project. So the BA is really responsible for asking the right questions and getting the right answers from stakeholders so that we can then write and ultimately solution either problems or improve something that is being experienced so that we can improve the ultimate business goals. Now, a BA, a business analyst, is really anybody who performs these activities. You could be a project manager, you could be a systems analyst, sometimes we're called a business process analyst, but whatever title you may have, if you are doing any of the tasks that I'm going to outline in just the next few minutes, you're probably playing the role of a business analyst. So ultimately, our goal is to, number one, is to improve process efficiency. I mean, this is kind of the goal behind any type of project or process improvement. That means that if we're doing something that is ineffective or maybe has a high degree of defects, if it takes too many steps in order to get to some sort of a conclusion, whatever that may be, a business analyst will identify the problem and then come up with suggestions on how to improve it. Now, this could be done through what's called requirements. Requirements are a condition that a solution has to embrace. But oftentimes, we have to do a little bit of root cause analysis. This means getting back to the thing that's actually the true problem and not just the symptom that someone might be experiencing. So when we define these solutions, it's always in the context of the root cause. If we can't fix the problem, then oftentimes the problem continues even after a solution has been fielded. Now, this is not an easy job. Some of you probably already know that whenever you are trying to gather requirements or whenever you're trying to define a solution, number one is that many people may not want to participate to the degree that they can or they should. For example, when you go and try to find stakeholders that have a need or you need them to explain what their problem is, oftentimes they may not want to participate in meetings or they may only give you half the solution. So what we do is we have to make sure that we use some investigation skills to be able to discover and uncover some of the issues that organizations are currently experiencing. Oftentimes when we do hear from a person as to what they would like to have changed or what their requirements are, there's oftentimes a lack of clarity in how they're explaining it to us. Oftentimes business requirements are not very well managed, or there's two groups within a business that can't see eye to eye. So there's a non-standard approach when they're actually attempting to do something. One of the goals of a business analyst is to try to standardize the way in which the business performs a certain process. Whenever you are a business analyst, we can almost guarantee that we're not being brought in early enough into a project. Now, with the invention of Agile, some of you may be using an Agile methodology. This problem does decrease for a BA because we are part of the core team that starts on day one, and therefore we have an advantage of hearing the problems as they're being explained. Oftentimes we don't have enough time to do the work, right? We have a compressed schedule. Sometimes stakeholders don't know how to express themselves or explain what they want or what they need. So what we do is we bring some core competencies to the team or to the organization, and one of the most important ones is analytical thinking and ultimately problem solving. We also apply some behavioral characteristics like personal organization, ethical behavior, being trustworthy. Many BAs who have been in the field for a while have developed business knowledge. This is knowledge of not only the organization for which the solution has to be derived, but also for industry best practices. What a BA can do is bring that knowledge with them and help to solve problems that will really stick and not just be superficial. Another common trait, characteristic of a BA is their communication skills, being able to write, being able to explain things to a group of people so that they can understand. Also, interaction skills, having the skills to bring people together and facilitate a meeting, having a discussion, interviewing someone so that you can gain insight into their issues. And of course, because we are a liaison between the business and the IT organization, we also have to have knowledge of software applications, some of which are simple, like the Microsoft Office suite, but sometimes we have to know the applications that are being used by the business community. Hey, let me test your analytical ability. And we've got several polling questions that I'd like to present to you. This is the first one. This will test your analytical ability. So the question goes like this. There are 5 people of different heights. Alan is taller than Dale, who is taller than Earl. Carla is shorter than Bill, but taller than Alan. The question to you is, who is the third tallest person? So Mayanne, why don't we launch the poll and let's collect the responses to see if the folks online have what it takes to do a little bit of analytical thinking. And we'll give you about 15 seconds.
All right, Vince, the highest ranked answer is Alan.
And you know what, Mayanne? The folks that answered Alan are correct. What a great group. Now I know who's on the line. These are true analysts. So if you're a part of the majority who selected Alan, Alan is truly the third tallest person. Good work, team. Wow, I'm very impressed, Mayanne. Thank you for handling the poll. Okay, so then here's the next question for you. When you're a business analyst, one of the things we like to do is write really good requirements, because if you can find a problem early in the process, it's a lot less expensive to fix than putting it into production as a defect. So here's your question. How much more expensive is it to find and fix a problem in production rather than finding and fixing that same exact problem in requirements? So why don't we launch this poll, Mayanne? Let's see if people have a general feeling as to how much more expensive it is to fix a problem in production. We'll give you about 15 seconds to respond.
And Alan, the highest ranked answer at 38% is 40 times.
You know, that is definitely a good try, but would you believe, and this study was done by Hewlett-Packard, would you believe that a defect that is found in production is actually 100 times more expensive to fix than had we found that during the requirements gathering process? I mean, you could imagine this yourself, right, team? When you're just thinking about what the system should do from the user's point of view, it's relatively cheap to fix that or to find and fix a problem. But once you've designed and you've coded and you've tested and now you've released that problem into production, it could be as much as 100, and I've seen as much as 1,000 times more expensive to fix that exact same problem. So thank you for participating in that poll, but the correct answer is it's really expensive to find a problem later than earlier. And by the way, that's what business analysis is all about. Let's make sure that we build the right system. Let's make sure that we solve the right problem. Now, to do this, we have an arsenal of techniques that we use, and I'd like to explore with you the 4 different types of requirements. So as a business analyst, when we start eliciting requirements, there are 4 basic requirements that we gather. And by the way, a requirement is a condition or a capability that's needed by someone, by a stakeholder, that has to be met by a solution in order to achieve or solve a problem. So what we're doing right here is we're writing something down, and sometimes we write it down in a short form, like a user story, if you're on an agile project, or sometimes we write it down in a long form, like a traditional shall statement in more of a waterfall project. But either way, we are defining requirements. So let's go through each of the 4 types. The first one is called a business requirement. And a business requirement is more like a goal or an objective. This is basically encapsulating the needs of the organization as a whole. And generally, we perform this type of high-level requirements definition, we call them business requirements, during what's called strategy analysis. If you're on an agile project, we have a 4 to 8 hour meeting called a strategy session. And during that 4 to 8 hour meeting, we develop what's called the product backlog. While we're developing the product backlog, we have to answer this simple question. What are the goals or the objectives that this project or product is attempting to achieve? Well, they are called business requirements. Now, these business requirements also include something called business rules. And business rules are conditions of logic that an analyst would capture in order to make sure that the system performs as expected. Now, the second type of requirement, this is really where we talk directly to our stakeholders. And remember, a stakeholder is kind of a user, someone with a vested interest in the system that we're developing. So a stakeholder requirement really is written from a user's perspective, a stakeholder's perspective. And it really describes how they will interact with a solution. These are typically requirements that will be visible to them once the solution is fielded into production. The third type of requirement is where the rubber meets the road. This is where we take those stakeholder requirements and we start to derive what's called technical requirements. These are the requirements that basically are grouped into 2 categories. One is called a functional requirement. Functional requirements are the behaviors or the actions that the system will exhibit from the point of view of the stakeholder. but it's mostly from the systems perspective. The second type of category is called non-functional requirements. These are how well the system will perform. We'll talk about performance and capacity, availability, maintainability. It's all the illities that a business analyst will capture. And these are the types of requirements that are often discussed directly with the developers, directly with the architects, directly with the technical IT organization. The fourth and final type of requirement that a business analyst gathers and writes down are called transition requirements. Transition requirements are basically those things that we need in order to transition from the current state, the way it works today, to the way we want it to work in the future. So a transition requirement gets us from where we are to where we want to be. And these transition requirements could come in the form of a data migration. So if you're going from an old database to a new database, we would kind of describe that transition. Believe it or not, training. So taking someone from what they know today to what we need them to know in the future is also a form of transition requirements. So team, these are the four basic requirements that a business analyst generally documents. Now there are some subcategories, but for the most part, these are the four highest level requirement types. Hey, Mayan, let's give them another poll. Let's see if they have what it takes to answer this question. So what percentage of overall project time do you think should be spent in gathering, elaborating, documenting, and communicating product requirements? Is it 10%, 30%, 50%, or 70%? Why don't we put up the poll and see if the team can answer this one. Think about it before you answer. What is the percentage of overall project time that is generally, that should be, maybe the question should be spent in gathering, elaborating, writing it down, and then communicating it among our stakeholders?
It was a close one, Vince, but 50% edged out 70% just by 2%.
You're a great analyst, Mayan, by the way. Hey, congratulations to the team. 50% is the correct answer. So 50% of your time is generally spent in the process of understanding what it is that we're trying to build, right? And that comes in the form of talking. It comes in the form of writing something down. It comes in the form of communicating, right? So 50%. How many people spend that much time with requirements? Do you know what the industry average is? 10%, right? 10% is what we are often given to basically perform the requirements analysis activities. And I have to tell you, that's way too low. So we have to make sure that we allocate enough time to make it happen correctly. Hey, let's try another one. We're on a roll now, Mayan. So for projects that fail, how many do so as a direct result of poorly managed requirements? Let's put up that polling question, Mayan. Let's see if people recognize the failure rate that's attributed to poor requirements. Is it 10%? Is it 42%? Is it 71%? Or is it 100% of project failures that can be attributed to bad requirements?
The winning answer is 71%.
They are terrific. Unbelievable. You really know your statistics. Yeah, this was a study that was done and published in CIO magazine called Fixing the Requirements Mess. And it is messy, right? You know it probably better than anyone. Hey, thanks, Mayan. Let's see. We're on a roll now. So let's talk about the 6 knowledge areas that every good business analyst should know about. And by the way, these knowledge areas come directly out of a publication from the International Institute of Business Analysis called the BA Body of Knowledge. This is a guidebook. It was published several years ago. The newest version is version 3, and it's a description of generally accepted best practices or commonly used practices in the field of business analysis. This is a good book if you're a practitioner, right? So if you're a business analyst, you probably want to peek at this book because it provides us with some direct information that will help us to do our job better. Hey, let's present to you the 6 knowledge areas. These are the areas that every good business analyst should know about. We're going to start right in the middle of this relationship diagram because we like to start at the beginning. You know, one of the things that makes a great business analyst is to be involved as early in your project as possible. And by the way, that's day 1. Right? So if you're being invited to write requirements after the project has already been started, I hate to break it to you, but it's already too late because then we're going to be playing catch up in most of the things that we have to do. So let's take a look at strategy analysis. If you're on an agile project, by the way, this is a knowledge area that is performed in approximately 1 to 2 hours. During the very, very first kickoff meeting called the strategy session. If you're on a waterfall project, this is generally done when you're building what's called a business case. But let's talk about what this is all about. So first of all, strategy analysis is a very high-level perspective in terms of what or how will we measure success at the end of the project. So what is the criteria that we will use to determine if we've done a good job at the very end, right? Let's start at the end, even though this is day 1. Let's figure out where we want to be after the project is finished. Now, generally, if you're on a waterfall project, we'll create what's called a business case. A business case is pretty much a strategy document that describes objectives and goals and high-level business requirements. In fact, this is where business requirements are generally created, right? So when you're thinking about what is a business requirement, it's really a goal or an objective that we're trying to achieve. Let's start there. Now, in Agile, we call these things, we call them goals and objectives, but sometimes they turn into features, epics, or user stories. And generally, these are the things that define the high-level product backlog. Now, we are going to be doing a current state analysis, some future state analysis. We'll talk about risk analysis, and we'll certainly define a change strategy at this early point in time. It's all part of strategy analysis. Now, I've asked my friends and colleagues, can you offer us a couple good tips on what you do in your practice to basically make sure that strategy analysis is done much better than it is currently? So here are 2 tips that I'd like to share with you. Number 1, let's try to improve the business processes before we start changing the software. It's very common for people like you and I to want to jump to a solution so that we fix the system, we fix the application. Do you know it's best practice to take a look at the business process to see if it is being performed efficiently? And then once we make a change to the business process, then it's time to fix the software to align to the business process. How many times have we come up with a solution that really doesn't fix the real problem? Well, sometimes the real problem is not the software. Would you believe that sometimes the problem is an inefficient or ineffective or outmoded business process? Sure. So let's start there. Tip number 2, make sure that you write your business and stakeholder requirements first before you start to estimate the cost and the schedule of your project. How often do you and I get the question, how much is this going to cost me? Before we even know what the requirements are. Isn't that frustrating? Well, one way to solve that misestimation or incorrect estimation is by writing business and stakeholder requirements first before your project charter is created. Now, I know that may sound like it's out of order. Some people like to write their charter first and then write the business requirements second, but I'm here to tell you that that's in the wrong order. What you should do is write the business requirements first and then determine how much effort or how much work or how much time it will take in order to build the correct solution. Hey, that's gold for some of you, okay? If you're able to achieve these two tips, your life is going to get a lot better. Okay, let's talk about business analysis planning and monitoring, because when it comes real time to start doing the real heavy lifting, and that's where we start writing detailed requirements, we want to be able to plan out our effort. And I mean the business analyst work that has to be done. So when we're performing in this knowledge area, what we're doing is we're organizing and we're coordinating the efforts of the business analyst and the stakeholders that we have to interact with. This is where you're going to lay out the steps that you're going to take along the way. This is where we're going to identify and plan on stakeholder engagement. You know, who do you want to talk to? We're also going to talk about the oversight. How are we going to measure and manage the governance of the business analysis process? How are we going to document, how are we going to capture the information? And believe us, I mean, when we start gathering information, there's a lot of it. The question is, how do we want to capture and manage that information? And finally, another task that we perform within this knowledge area is how do we measure business analysis performance? You know, this is one way to make sure that we successfully achieve our goals as a business analyst, is to take a look for best practices. So let me share with you a couple tips that my friends and I put together for you. Okay, number one is let's determine the effort of the business analyst before we begin doing the work. I don't know how many times we're jumping right into requirements definition, and we haven't even laid out our plan as to how we're going to make that happen. So let's list all the things that we're going to do. Who are we going to talk to? What questions are we going to ask them? Who are we going to gather that information from? How are we going to analyze, document, and communicate requirements for our project? Put together your little mini plan before you begin your effort, and you will see that your work will go so much more smoothly than if you didn't. Second tip is make sure you perform stakeholder analysis early. And what I mean by that is on day one, probably as close to day one as you can get. Number one question is, who are your stakeholders? What roles do they play? How influential are they? And how impacted will they be with regard to the solution that we are going to propose? So one of the things about stakeholder analysis is to get to know your stakeholders first before we start to engage them in an elicitation activity. Make sense, right? Okay. Hey, let's talk about the gathering process, right? This is probably what most business analysts do, is to ask the right questions and get the right answers. We call this elicitation. It's a process of drawing out information. So this is to gather information from these key stakeholders and certainly feedback or confirm the results of our findings with a broader audience. There are 5 steps to this process. The first one is to prepare for elicitation. That means you're going to write down questions that you're going to need to ask these stakeholders. Then you're going to conduct the actual elicitation activity. We're then going to provide what we have found back to the stakeholders from which we've gathered them from. That provides a type of confirmation activity. We're going to communicate the BA activities, meaning communicate what we've heard to a broader and more diverse audience. And then we're going to manage these interactions. Sometimes we'll have a meeting, sometimes we'll just do an email communication, but whatever technique you use, we need to make sure that we continually keep everybody apprised of what we have found out during elicitation. Hey, let me ask you a question. And Mayanne, let's put this question up. What is the average duration of the most effective interview? Is it 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 60 minutes, or however long it takes you? Let's see what people may say is the right duration of time for the most effective interview.
All right, the winning answer is 20 minutes.
I don't know who's on the line, Mayanne, but these folks really know the secrets behind a great elicitation session. In fact, we prefer to interview more people than less people for a longer duration, right? So we want to interview lots of people for 20 minutes apiece versus one person for 60 minutes or however long it takes. See, that's the trick of the trade, and you know it. 20 minutes is the most effective. So let's talk about some of the tips that will help you to maintain a 20-minute interview. Number one, why don't you write down a list of probing questions prior to interacting with your stakeholders? That's a great idea for even just a life skill, right? So before you go into an interview, and you're, by the way, the interviewer, not the interviewee, you're doing the interviewing as a BA, you should be developing a list of 7 to 10 questions that you would ask your audience when you engage them in an elicitation activity. And by the way, don't keep using the same techniques. You know who you are. If all you're doing is conducting a focus group or a requirements workshop, or maybe you're using observation, don't just do that one technique. It's always a good idea to basically use a couple different techniques to be able to get to information in a few different ways. Because if you keep using the same technique and you keep going back to the same stakeholders, you're going to keep getting the same information. So it's important for us to vary our techniques. Okay, write that down. That's worth something. All right, let's talk about requirements analysis and design. And this is really where the rubber meets the road, because this is where the technical requirements are being developed. Now, requirements analysis is more of a thoughtful, heads-down analysis approach. So once you've gathered these requirements from the stakeholders, right, you've written your user stories for those agilists out there, it's now time to explore much more detailed requirements. So this is going to be a derivation. This is going to be a decomposition of detailed requirements. Remember we said that requirements come, solution requirements come in two categories. One is called functional requirements, and the other one is non-functional. Well, this is where you're going to be capturing the majority of those types of technical requirements. Now, for a user story, that might just simply be on the back of the story card as acceptance criteria. If you're using a waterfall approach, you may have to do a little more pragmatic requirement specification to be able to capture the details of those requirements. So we actually use both text and pictures to represent our requirements. We have to verify them, we have to validate them, we have to make sure that we organize them and create a requirements architecture. We have to make sure that we define how we're going to take the next step into a solution design. And oftentimes, a business analyst, if they're doing their job right, are suggesting multiple options to solve the same problem. So a developer, a designer, an architect, a lot of times they want to go down one path. What a BA will often do is to give them a couple different options. You know, you could do it this way, or you could do it that other way, and both might solve the problem. So here are the 2 tips, and I'd like you to take note. Number one of our best practices is to use graphical modeling, or sometimes referred to as visual modeling. It's one of our industry's best practices. So if you've gotten into the habit of writing textual requirements, why don't you try drawing a picture? Now, this can come in the form of a use case diagram. It could look like a screen prototype. If you've ever used a sequence diagram or a class diagram or a state diagram, these are referred to as UML diagrams. And you know what they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, that's what we're doing here. We're using a picture to represent requirements that have traditionally been simply written down. The other thing I'd like to leave you with is that if you're a business analyst, please, you owe it to your stakeholders to make their job easier. I don't know what happened in our environment, but you know what happened is that business analysts oftentimes write requirements to make it easier for the developer to implement, but they forget about who the user is. So if you have to do 17 mouse clicks to get to something that you use every day, are we really doing a service to the end user? Of course not. So define requirements from the point of view of the actor, of the user, to avoid designing or requiring that a system be designed that is easy to implement but hard to use. Hey, let me ask this question, Mayanne. A requirement for a system to alert a customer service rep within under 1 minute might be called this type of requirement. Let's put up that polling question, Mayanne, and let's ask the team, is this a non-functional requirement? Is it a functional requirement? Is it a business rule? Or do you call that a legal requirement? This one's a hard one, Mayanne. Let's see how we do.
All right, the answer that one was the functional requirement.
And I knew it was going to be hard because a functional requirement describes an action or a behavior that the system must exhibit. Remember, that's the definition of a functional requirement. And unfortunately, that's not the right answer. And here's why. You see where it says in under 1 minute? That's called a performance requirement. And performance requirement or response time requirement describes how well the system will do from the user's point of view. Not what the system is doing, but how well it will do it. So the correct answer is A. Okay, that's not bad, Mayanne. Let's give them a chance to redeem themselves. We got one more polling question coming up. The next topic, the next knowledge area is called a requirements lifecycle management. This is where if you need to do change control or you need to know how you're going to prioritize the requirements, in an agile world, we call this backlog grooming. That's the term we give to it. But basically, when you're managing requirements, so remember a user story, an epic, a feature, these are all types of requirements. When you are managing these requirements, we need to prioritize them. Now, you could do this in many ways. You can use a Moscow must have, should, could, won't. You can use the Kano analysis. You can just use binary sorting. There's a whole bunch of techniques, but one of the things that we do is figure out which technique of prioritization is going to be best used on our project. We also need to trace requirements. If you're writing a requirement that doesn't trace to a business need, we say that that requirement isn't needed. We also need to know how to maintain requirements, assess requirement changes, and get them approved. You know, we need to answer the question, who is going to approve these requirements? Well, in an agile world, they're called the product owner. But in a waterfall world, there's so many stakeholders. The question is, who do you want to approve those requirements? So here's 2 tips for you. Number 1, prioritize your requirements early and often. In Agile, we say that we should prioritize our backlog, and that backlog is our list of requirements. We want to prioritize those requirements at the beginning of every sprint, right? Because things will change between sprints. So therefore, you want to reprioritize before you start selecting the next set of requirements to implement for the next sprint. That's number one. Number two is once your requirements have been defined, it's always a good choice to do something called baselining. Baselining means let's lock down the requirements. Let's make sure what we agreed to. And then any requirements that are added to that list are going to be basically change requests, right? These are the things that people want to change. Now in Agile, we don't go through any serious change control process, but certainly in Waterfall, that methodology does require us to manage the change because change equals more work. And if we have a tight schedule, if we have a constrained budget, then the question is, can we really accept that change, or should we treat it as phase two or differently? Okay, here we go, Mayan. Let's give them this. Let's see if they can redeem themselves. What percentage of requirements as originally defined will change before the end of your project? Is it 15%, 35, 55, or 75? Let's see how they vote.
We have a tie, actually, a tie between 35% and 55%.
Between, what is it, 35 and 55?
Yes.
Okay, so you know who you are. I'm not going to tell you, but if you voted for B as in boy, you're the 50% that did it right. So 35% of requirements that are originally defined will change to some significant degree before the end of the project. Now, some of you may say, boy, it feels like a lot more than that. But the study that the Standish group did recognized that on average, about 35% of your originally defined requirements will have some sort of a modification or maybe even some significant change to it. All right, good, Mayan. They're doing great. Here's the final knowledge area. So when we're talking about solution evaluation, this is kind of the final step. And the final step is to take a look at what was built and determine if it meets the criteria for success. So this is where we're going to, once a system has been fielded into production, we're going to then measure its performance. We're going to, capture some metrics. We're going to determine, the current state versus the future state. Are there any improvements? And if there isn't, I hope there is, but let's say we don't have an improvement to the degree that we expect, we would then recommend actions to either implement a change or hopefully a workaround that will improve its outcome. So here are the two tips, team. Number one, be very careful. Just because you built a solution, it doesn't mean that the organization is ready to receive. So one of the things you should do as a business analyst is to make sure that the people that are going to be using this new solution are ready. And we can use force field analysis. We can just basically do kind of a lunch and learn to decide, are the people ready to use this new solution? If the answer is no, please do not push it on them until they are. A lot of times IT departments simply release code into production and then realize later that, boy, that didn't work really well because the end users were not ready for the new features, functions, capabilities. The other thing you want to do at the end is always make sure that whatever we built is bringing value to the business. Remember those business requirements? Remember those objectives? Well, the question you need to ask at the end is, how closely did we meet or exceed those business objectives? All right, here's the last polling question, Mayan. Let's see if they can stay the course. What percentage of features as ultimately delivered are rarely or never used by the end users? This is an interesting statistic. How many things have you built that are never or rarely used by the end user? 35, 45, 55, or 65%?
All right, the winning answer is 45%.
Yeah, so this team evidently works on really good projects because Agile, if you are an Agile team member, you will find that this statistic is a relatively old statistic. This was back in the waterfall days. Back in waterfall, would you believe that letter D as in dog was the right answer? This is a Standish Group report. 65% of the things that we built were rarely or never used by the end users. With the invention of Agile, we are getting closer to the business users by having a dedicated product owner. And so I do agree that the percentage has been reduced of things that we don't use, but it's still not down to zero. All right, good work, team. You are amazing. So this is the end of this brief presentation. Mayanne, thank you for doing such a great job with the polls, and thank everybody else for doing a great job. Why don't we open it up to any questions? I'd be happy to help answer them if you have a pending question that you'd like to ask.
You know what, we'll let everyone take some time to type in some questions. While they do that, just wanted to remind everyone that New Horizons offers courses that provide knowledge and prepare students for certifications, you know, from courses that are technical based and apps based. We offer a wide variety for you all. We have courses currently scheduled on our website, including a plethora of leadership and development courses as well, which may be coming up in the next couple of weeks. If you are interested in any of the material presented in this webinar, or if you have questions regarding available course offerings, please contact your local center for further information. You can go onto newhorizons.com and do a zip code search for the center nearest you. Also, the webinar schedule is up to date on our website. Just click on the webinars link to view the full schedule and register for any upcoming sessions that we have. As a friendly reminder, I'll also be sending out an archive recording link to view today's webinar, and you can pass that on to any colleagues who have missed the session. And I see that we have a couple questions here, Vince. First, what book do you recommend to get certified as a BA? Is there a PMI certification?
Yeah, there is. In fact, PMI, just over the last couple years, has been instrumental in offering a certification for anyone involved or interested in business analysis. It's called the PBA, the Professional Business Analyst Certification. And it is there is a guidebook that you would either download or purchase, I'm pretty sure. And PMI does offer a certification for those up-and-coming business analysts who would like to be endorsed by that organization. Also remember, if you're not already part of PMI, if you're not part of the program Project Management Institute, the IIBA, the International Institute of Business and Analysts, also offer a certification program as well. We call that the CBAP, Certified Business Analyst Professional, but you can also get the similar certification through PMI. I hope that answered their question.
It did, and a follow-up to that was, which one do you feel is better?
That's a hard question. So here's how we answer that, because both are credible certifications in our industry. The way you might want to approach this is if you are already a PMP, if you're already a project management professional, and you already are a member of PMI, then I would recommend that you continue that lineage by continuing to get certified through PMI using their PBA certification. However, if you are not a member of PMI and you really want to make business analysis your career, the IIBA offers a certification that is highly regarded internationally as one of the leading organizations that define this profession. So remember, PMI is more oriented towards project management. IIBA is more more focused on business analysis. So depending upon what your career path might be, you may want to choose one or the other, right? PBA if you're more project management oriented, or the CBAP or CCBA if you're more business analysis oriented. I know it's confusing because in our organization, in our community, there are two different types of certifications. And I think one way to make the decision, Mayanne, is by simply deciding if you already have an allegiance to PMI, then go down that path. You'll find it'll be more closely oriented to what you already know. IIBA is for those who don't have an allegiance or an alliance to PMI, and you want to become a business analyst professional, a career BA.
Great. And I think we have time for a couple more questions here. What are the most widely used software applications used in the BA world?
Well, I have to tell you, Microsoft Word is probably the most utilized, or Excel, Microsoft Excel. That's pretty much the tool that many BAs use. But for the most part, if you want a professional requirements management tool, the one that has the highest market share right now is Requisite Pro. That's an IBM product. I think that has the highest market share. However, I will tell you this, we got to be a little bit careful, because if you are using a agile approach, you need to make sure you choose a requirements application that is more closely aligned with the agile philosophy, which is lighter weight documentation. Okay, so this is the thing that you need to know. Depending upon the methodology that you're using, you may want to choose something like Jira or Team Foundation Server if you have a more agile-oriented methodology. If you are still using waterfall, which is, a fairly heavyweight kind of long duration requirements phase, then you would probably want a more robust tool, something that you can then use to not only write and capture, but also manage your requirements as well. And that would be something like Requisite Pro. Let me also suggest there's others on the market. I don't want to be an advocate for any one of these tools. Quite frankly, none of them satisfy 100% of your needs. But there are tools on the market like RM Caliber, there's Blueprint, there's iRise. All of these tools offer pros and cons when it comes to managing requirements. I hope that helped, Mayanne.
That did. Great. And our last question is, do you have any advice for a brand new BSA heading into an established large company?
Yeah, nothing beats business knowledge when you're a business analyst. So what I would do is, if you're heading into a company, why don't you do a little benchmarking with other companies that are in the same industry. So for example, if you're going to work for an insurance company, why don't you check out other insurance companies so you can bring with you some industry knowledge. And then once you arrive at the company and you're now part of their organization, I would then start your process of learning their business processes. Or here's something that you could do to add value as a new BA, is take one of their processes and document it using a business process model. That'll do two things. Number one is it'll give you experience in using one of the most important tools of our trade, which is a business process model. It'll also help you to learn very quickly what their business process is, because you're the one documenting it. And thirdly, it provides an advantage for the company because you are actually defining something that they more than likely have never written down themselves. So why don't you try that? Learn about the business and document one process using a business process model. And you can see there's YouTube videos online if you wanted just a quick view of what a business process model is, or you could take a course that will show you and describe and give you some hands-on experience on how to build these models yourself.
Great. That seems to be all the questions we have, Vincent. Thank you again for presenting. You were great. I think a lot of people learned a lot of different tips and tricks from you today. Again, everyone, thank you for joining us today. This concludes our webinar, and you may now log off. Thank you.